G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and I really hope that yesterday you had a brilliant day as well. I had a fantastic Christmas, but I am exhausted. I had 3 big family things on and trying to get work done in between that. But I really appreciate you guys and the support on my video, and I hope that today is as good as yesterday and taking some time for a rest as well. But legends, of course, we have a lot to go over in this video today. But what have I been saying for months, if not years now? The closer that we get to the end of the war, we will see an increase in the ferocity and brutality of the conflict as well, and shifts away from the primary battlefield. So we're going to go over a lot today. Of course, we're going to look at the missile attack. I need to look over, of course, the airliner that has crashed in Kazakhstan with 67 passengers aboard, including the crew. There was 38 killed and 29 survivors. Now, my heart goes out to those who were killed and their families, but 29 people surviving the incident, I think, goes to show the quality and the safety aboard those Embraer planes and how the pilots fought till the absolute last minute to get people home safely. So we'll talk about that. I want to talk about a power cable cut connecting Finland to Estonia. We'll look, of course, at the maps and some geolocations and some flags going up. And I want to talk about Lex Friedman and his interview he's doing with Volodymyr Zelensky and tie that into what I said right in the beginning about the shifts away from the battlefield and where people are looking maybe more in social society issues rather than the maps or the front line. So that'll link up. But where I want to start is what I spoke about yesterday with the Ursa Major ship that was carrying, of course, those very important pieces for Russian icebreakers. Now, if you have watched me for any period of time, something that I've been speaking about more and more and boring the shit out of people is Russia's increased dominance in the Arctic, specifically to do with its nuclear icebreaker fleet, the only country in the world that operates nuclear icebreakers. China is becoming a near-Arctic power, and we believe that Russia and China are working together to increase that capability, but at this point in time, they are the sole ones with that capability. And I've been saying for months and years that these icebreakers, these are a huge capability gap, both militarily and economically for the North Sea route. And that's where I link the hybrid warfare down to the Houthis targeting the Red Sea, because it may open up shipping companies looking at the North Sea route, Asia to Europe, going, maybe we will do this. And I have been saying as well that if I was working for some Intel, whatever, limiting the production of these would be what I would be looking at. I said that yesterday about this ship. And of course, we've seen this sink off the coast of Spain, carrying those parts. Now, there's been, of course, blame shifted across to what they're saying is a terror attack. Again, you need to take that with a grain of salt. But again, this would be a very, very juicy target for hybrid warfare and economic influence that Russia is gaining from that North Sea route and those ships as well, and increasing power in the Arctic. So this is from Russian media saying, after 3 explosions on the starboard side of the Russian vessel Ursa Major in the Mediterranean, a hole measuring 50 by 50 centimeters was discovered. The Russian news was told by the press service of this group of companies who owns it. The general ship alarm was declared on the vessel during an external emergency inspection of the vessel. A hole was discovered above the water line, approximately 50 to 30 centimeters from the water, and sea waves measuring approximately 50 by 50 centimeters. The edges of the hole were torn and directed inward. The vessel's deck was strewn with fragments. So let's go further on where this was before we get into it. I said a couple of weeks ago when Syria was falling, I said this area right here between Morocco, Algeria, and of course Spain, this is going to be incredibly difficult if Russia have any issues in this. Go back and watch the video. I've said, well, depending how the Russians want to get out of the Mediterranean, there's a couple of ways, but if they get stranded in here due to sanctions, getting any help is going to be very, very difficult, other than like a rescue mission. And this is exactly the area we spoke about would be so difficult for Russia. Now, back to this explosion. I rang a friend of mine who has a history in underwater, subsurface demolitions. You get the picture. You can probably know what unit around the world internationally he has worked for previously. But I asked about, like, what do you make of this? And he said, look, if we were doing this, we would use something like a limpet mine. And as you can see here, the above the waterline, what this has torn open as well. You can see some examples of limpet mines here. But back to what he was saying to me. He said it could have been like an underwater unmanned vehicle, a UUV, planting something like this. He said if it's on the move, that is very difficult also. But I told him about what I am drawing from this. I was like, look, incredibly important. It threatens Western shipping. It threatens the global or the Western hegemony on that shipping too. This is what I'm drawing into this, the suspicion on this. And I also brought up about the breaching of the hull from an explosion in the engine room if nothing else was in there. And he said, well, I agree that it definitely could be this. But he said 50 by 50 is big for a typical limpet mine. He said, well, it could be a shaped charge. But he said, if you see photographs of this, he said, we'll send them across because he'd be interested in having a look. But he said, these mines make a tearing effect on the boat rather than more of a penetrator like you may see on a tank. He said, it'll look like a tear open, as you can see in some photographs like this here. See how it looks like it's been torn? So he said, that is what to look for. And I did say that I was speaking to him about this, and he said, well, just, you and I both know that these suspicions could be, correct or not, and it could just be poor maintenance on the ship. But he did say there are units that operate all over, and those who you may not know the names of are enabled by many. And he did point at one country that we talk about a bit, being enabled by others to carry out this. Now, I'm not saying this is what has occurred, but I tell you, if you were to line things up, and I talk about the international importance of these icebreakers, we spoke about the area is one of the worst areas for a Russian ship to get hit in because it's basically a bloody NATO lake there controlled by the Spanish Navy. I tell you, I'm putting two and two together and saying I think it is likely maybe a level of sabotage. Now, we have from the owners of this, Ursa Major was a cargo ship built in 2009 with something under the Russian flag, going from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok. The dry cargo ship sank in the Mediterranean Sea, and according to the Obrono Logistics, the cause of the incident was a terror attack. That is what they are saying. So let's go further, and we see one very prominent Ukrainian page saying Russian bloggers believe that if Ukrainian intelligence, okay, who else, is behind the sinking of the Russian ship in the Mediterranean, it highlights complete failure of Russian intelligence services. So this is where people are saying is if it has sunk and Ukraine was able to blow that up, it's a failure of the Russian intelligence service. If it was a just an issue with the engine and there's explosion, well, it shows that the Russian Navy is incompetent, that has exploded and sunk the ship. And I agree on this, but you get this, like the Russian bloggers, and so straight away it's sort of pinning and going, you're not allowed to question this. And yes, it absolutely could be poor maintenance, but I'm not pointing at any intelligence service specifically at all. I'm saying for the Western world, the North Sea route, Russia's increased Arctic power, increased working with China and the Belt and Road Initiative, this is a very, very juicy target. And back to what my friend said, that they operate all over and are enabled by many. So we don't know who the enablers are, if this is what it was. And I'm not saying that it wasn't just poor maintenance and explosion, but again, could be. And I have spoken about at length, I believe that this is Russia's single biggest advantage, other than the nuclear weapons, is being the Arctic power. Icebreakers, nuclear propulsion on those, and the ability to influence that whole region. I've spoken yesterday and previously about when you think Russia, you don't think they give a shit about greenhouse gases, burning coal, drilling oil, pulling out gas. Why then has Russia put in the tightest emissions in some areas of the world, maritime emissions in that specific region, the Arctic? Because it basically rules out diesel-operated icebreakers working there all year, goes to the old nuclear boys being able to work there and those emission standards being put in to benefit that. It's hybrid warfare. That's what I believe on both sides. The Russians are playing a game, and that alarm bells ring on how it's sort of like we've said, these are very important. This area is the worst possible area. Maybe it's all just things not lining up, but again, I'll let you guys say in the comments what you believe about this. And this is going to go into something else before we talk about that Embraer plane going down. Now, Lex Friedman, of course, is going to interview Zelensky. Now, Lex, I've listened to a few of his podcasts. I struggle to listen to it, but I have nothing against him. And you see a lot of Zelensky won't be giving an interview in Russian while his country is under attack by Russia in a potentially existential war for Ukraine. And this is what we have seen, is every single pro-Ukrainian account is dogpiling on Lex for a completely rational request. So he has asked, I hope that we can do this interview in Russian, a language that we're both fluent in. Now, Zelensky's English is nowhere near as good as his Russian. Zelensky is a native, fluent Russian speaker. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way it is. He's not as good at speaking Ukrainian as he is Russian, as people have told me. And what I'm saying is I think this is in Zelensky's favour because he won't be as articulate in English as he may be in Russian, a language he's more familiar with. And then this is like the most pro-Ukrainian statement ever, and people still have a problem with this. For people who may not know, the Ukrainian language has increasingly become a symbol of Ukrainian people's fight for freedom and independence. Unfortunately, it is a language I do not speak yet. So he's saying it's a symbol for your freedom and independence, but he doesn't speak it yet. But I am learning it. I do not know how to speak. I do know how to speak fluent Russian, as does President Zelensky, and does a large fraction of the Ukrainian people. And a huge percentage of Ukrainian people speak Russian. So I think this is just opening it up to more people. I don't see how this is getting dogpiled on. Well, I can see it. It's because they're trying to move away from the battlefield to point at other issues, and we're going to bring this up. Speaking in a language we're both fluent in was not the most deep, dynamic, and powerful conversation. We will, of course, translate and dub into Ukrainian and English. So dub and translate into Ukrainian. I can't see how there's any, I won't swear, problem with this. And this triggeredness over something so minor and something where you're sort of really pulling at, you're parting hairs to try and get to this, is a reminder to me of why a lot of social justice movements will ultimately fail. Because if you're not allowed to be self-critical, and you can never be far enough in one way, eventually it will implode. And this is what we're seeing, is you can't be self-critical about exactly problems in Ukraine, which is having a frontline effect. It's not having an online propaganda effect. It's having an effect on the front line, but you can never be far enough. Friedman here says it's a symbol for freedom and independence. He's learning the language. He's going to dub it both ways. He's doing what I believe is in Zelensky's interest. And you know what? It's still not far enough. It's like when I got flack for recommending people read Tolstoy. Copped a lot of flack about that. And then it became very obvious that all the ones who gave me flack about that have definitely not read or do not understand Tolstoy and his views and his work also. But that never being far enough is a huge problem. And this goes into something I wanted to speak about, I have mentioned about before. And I thought, well, look, the best way to do this, I want to ask ChatGPT what it thinks about this. Now, I've cropped out my original question, but there were a few questions to get this. But between two warring parties in a protracted attritional war, when one of the parties is winning, what do you make about the other shifting focus away from the main battlefield and onto social and political topics? And it says shifting focus away from the main battlefield to social topics can be a significant indicator of warring sides' declining strength and strategic desperation. The diversion often reflects a loss of confidence in military success and an attempt to influence public opinion or maintain internal cohesion. And we're going to go through this. But we have seen that Zelensky himself has said Ukraine can't get back Donbass, Crimea militarily on the battlefield. It's going to have to be done diplomatically. So this is all coming into this. We're seeing so much more focus away from what's happening on the front line to what's maybe being posted online. And a good indicator of this, and you can go and have a look, is notice all the pages that originally were doing mapping or countering Russian disinformation, misinformation. But let's talk about the mapping ones. Ask yourself the last time they actually posted a map. Right, now it's just sort of attacking this. It's gone from countering Russian disinformation, misinformation, what was huge, especially in the beginning, to releasing just propaganda misinformation or just attacking anyone who is critical or self-critical amongst things. So efforts to shift public attention. And this goes into this whole idea of propaganda, but shifting away from the main battlefield. And what I'll say is in 2022 and in 23, Russia had huge propaganda and misinformation campaigns around failed attacks that had occurred, failed to take areas, and aimed at discrediting leaders as well. That still exists, but it's nowhere near as prominent as it was then. In 2024, the Ukrainian government and the supporters, the NATO, your alt-pro accounts, they have been attacking leaders, journalists, maps, bloggers, if their opinion is not in line directly with the official stance. Even look at what Lexa said here, and this is what I'm getting at, that it's never far enough. And that is very telling, at least to me. And what I say is the surest way to kill mold is sunlight. Truth works much the same way. I believe it was a judge in the American courts who said that. I apologize if that is incorrect. But what I say here is when the war goes silent and everything sort of cools off, it will be seen that the biggest patriots for Ukraine, for the soldiers, and not the hand shandy, Russia will collapse, Ukraine winning, Crimea, #beach party sort of crowd. The biggest patriots are those trying to improve the conditions on the front line by calling out bullshit that is preventing Ukraine from having more success or more favourable outcomes on the front line. Those who looking at calling out corruption, who look at and call out guilt politics being used in international forums, that guilt politics doesn't work. Calling out why is manpower not being fixed? Why is rotation not being fixed? Why is command not being fixed? And why is democracy not being reinstated? History will show that they are the biggest patriots for this, not the hand shandy-a-thon. No, everything's perfect, keep going, throw more men at it, and ignore guys getting ripped off the street and not being allowed to come off the front line. There will be a shift at some point. Well, I think the whole world has a problem in critical thinking, so maybe there won't be. But again, let's go back to the original question here about why we may see this. Efforts to shift public attention, propaganda and cultural campaigns. Governments or factions may increasingly emphasise ideological, cultural or historical narratives to rally support. This can include glorifying past victories, emphasising national identity or vilifying the enemy in non-military terms. So what we see is a lot of it, the enemy is not Russian soldiers, it's not Putin, it's not the Kremlin, it's Russians in general. As well as you can see historical narratives emphasising national identity. This is the exact same stuff we've seen Russia do. We continue to see Russia do, but of course we're seeing an increase in Ukraine doing this more recently. Moral superiority narratives. This goes without saying. Shifting focus to issues like human rights, societal progress, or ethical arguments to compensate for battlefield losses. These are real topics that should be spoken about, but there is absolutely ignoring what is happening on the front line. That's why I say go and look at some of those mapping pages who started with that, and now there's not a map to be found. Signs of internal weakness, deflecting blame. Leaders may highlight social challenges, corruption, foreign interference, and social inequities to distract from military setbacks or deteriorating conditions on the front lines. Deflecting blame, this is massive at the moment into many different areas, all the way to the American administration too, and this is going to become more and more relevant soon. Managing unrest, focus on domestic issues might indicate growing dissent or instability, requiring efforts to pacify or redirect public discontent. Deprioritization of military goals. This, I've put a star, this is important. Shifting the narrative to survival instead of achieving victory. And we saw this shift. It came slow, but it came mid this year, or maybe early mid this year to now. There has been a huge narrative shift. between Crimean Beach Party to survival, diplomatically taking back those areas. The rhetoric becomes about enduring or surviving despite setbacks, often accompanied by calls for sacrifice from the population. We've seen this. People are going to need to sacrifice to go to the front line or come back to Ukraine if they have left into Europe. Focus on international perception. Emphasis on portraying the conflict in terms of social justice or victimhood to garner sympathy and support from external audiences. And this is one of the big things we see about Russia the aggressor, its existential war. Now, this can be that. It can be this. But at the same time, it's also ignoring problems around mobilization, rotation, internal issues, and is focusing all on that sort of social aspect of it. And I believe that these are key signs in what we are seeing the situation become. Links back to what I said in the beginning about this war is going to grow more brutal and more messy towards the end, and that is what we are seeing. A loss of strategic focus. Dilution of military objectives. Resources and attention are redirected to non-military priorities, indicating that achieving battlefield superiority is no longer seen as feasible. And I think Kursk is a great example of this. Getting the front line in Donbass in south may not be feasible. Let's push into Kursk, even though, in my opinion, nothing in there was really worth what it is, including the kilometre squares, including the gas terminal in there, for the losses, the great equipment, and the most trained soldiers going to that point. Have we seen it change everything? No, we haven't. But resource and tension moved away. Strikes against Russian command, soldiers going to Syria, all of this. Important, but the guy for the CBRN, the commander there, how much influence in this war did he have? Minimal. In Syria, how much is this going to influence Russia on a large scale? A lot. In Ukraine front line, not that much, including, of course, that ship carrying the icebreaker parts I spoke about in the beginning. It could be either way, but I think a lot's lining up on that ship going down. Loss of strategic focus. Dilution of military objectives. Sorry, we spoke about that. Increased censorship and domestic policing. Efforts to control societal narratives and suppress dissent might draw resources away from the war effort. So controlling the narrative. And this has become more and more and more. We see Kiev Independent all the time releasing about SBU or intelligence services looking into what journalists are doing, looking into people. And of course, the best example of this week has been Deep State, with the map shut down for multiple days, announced back with, we don't know how much influence that map is going to have externally on it or internally on the map to show positive narratives or not show negative narratives, more so, or not speak out against problems, which of course is a huge problem. But what I'm reading into this is that he's saying things are not good. Let's talk about the large missile attack that was launched against Ukraine. Now, Nowell reports, pro-Ukrainian account here, he shows the amount of missiles coming. None of the ballistics were hit, none of the S-300s were hit, and there was 55, 62 KH-101s, all of the KH-59s, and less than half of the Shahed drones, which these rates, I always say, grain of salt, because it's typically 100%, but these claimed rates are very, very low, especially compared to other times. Now, of course, from this, we've seen many power plants have been attacked and the power is out in many areas too. But this is low rate of interception compared to attacks in the last months and years. And goes back to what I spoke about the other day. Sources in air defence units told The Guardian there's deficit at the front has become so acute the General Staff has ordered already depleted air defence units to free up more men to send to the front line as infantry, saying that it's reached a critical level and air defence may not function properly, and it's a risk to Ukraine's security. These people know how it works and can't just be replaced, as well as the sensitive nature of the information they have if they were to be captured. Could that reduction in interception rates be from that? People will say it's because of American or European interceptors, but could it be those guys are getting sent to the front line also? We heard rumours of it months ago, and as far as I'm aware, that is confirmed in my mind. Keith Kellogg, of course, who Trump has appointed as a special envoy to Ukraine and Russia, who is really be heading up how this war ends. He said Christmas should be a time of peace, yet Ukraine was brutally attacked on Christmas Day, launching large-scale missile and drone attacks on the day of the Lord's birth. Is wrong. The world is closely watching actions on both sides. The US is more resolved than ever to bring peace to the region. So points out, bring peace to the region, and of course is saying that attacks on Christmas Day by Russia is not the way forward. many people called him out here saying, why didn't you say that Russia launched these attacks as well? And I understand that criticism, although we have seen drones attack into Russia last night also, and that goes into the airliner crash and the air defense active. But before we get to there, let's look at the map. So, of course, we have Ukraine in the center here, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Of course, the red check is area that Russia has made over the past, well, this map we don't know, but let's go 24 hours. They haven't updated today. I don't know what the future of this map is going to become, but something I am seeing more and more is that Ukraine, people are saying, is readying for further assaults, offensive assaults into Kursk to increase the kilometre squares that Ukraine hold in here. Now, I get that to a degree as far as trying to just increase that, but as far as the resources it would take into here, and the logistics overmatch that Russia has here, I don't get it. If we see that, I don't know. I shared messages off the front line the other day saying I thought we were pulling out, and then I went to this area and there was more equipment than ever, so maybe we will. I don't get it. I think it's one way to speed up an end to the war, but not in Ukraine's favour. Unless Ukraine could push to get Kursk. Until there, as far as what is strategically absolutely important to the state, that's going to have a huge effect, I don't get it. And I'm happy to hear any opposing views, and I'm happy to change my view. But in the months that Ukraine has held Kursk, I still have never understood the initial push in. And like I say, people go, yes, but at negotiations, I'm sorry, that negotiation is irrelevant because it's not going to be any more than 1-to-1. It may not even be that due to Russia's advantage. I don't get it. You've pulled your best soldiers and your best equipment, the Abrams, the Charlies, the Leopards, and the units operating in here too, into what I see as strategically irrelevant positions and area overall. And if anything, has reversed that to now they're stuck in here and Russia could launch into Sumy. Maybe it's attack. I don't get it. I don't know. I guess the big things that it has turned is Ukraine can now use long-range strategic strikes. There's not enough of those available, I believe, to actually make a difference. And the idea of the ghost of Pyongyang at this point, which Zelensky has said 3,000 have been killed or wounded in here, potentially opening up Ukraine to receive South Korean arms. That would be a big win. But again, what this sort of is the arguments you hear about these little bits and pieces is the ignoring the situation of the main battlefield. And you'll see all these accounts, they're talking about Lex Friedman, they're talking about what Keith Kellogg said, they're talking about this, rather than why aren't you focused on what's happening in Kurakhove? Why aren't you focused on what's happening in Pokrovsk? Regardless of what your narrative is, that's the story of the day, even if we've taken 28 minutes to get here. Really stupid. But let's go into Kurakhove and have a look here. No movements shown on this map today, but we do have some geolocated footage. Now, there was a couple of flags go up in the 12-minute video that was released, and I can't figure out which flag it was, but one of them was raised right about here. So just where my cursor is there, just outside of the red zone. If this is the wrong screenshot of it, I apologize. There was two. I think they're on the same roof, but I couldn't tell from the angles. We see a Russian flag and a battle flag being raised on the roof there. This looks like a white flag as if the French were there. But again, that is what we are seeing. That was a joke. Don't get your all panties in a knot. Let's look at Kurakhove for then Syriac map. So movement just to the south, not showing much movement in Kurakhove itself, except for when we zoom in just a little bit in here, right where that flag was put up. But you can see these black lines. These, of course, are the major defensive works here that Russia has been pushing through, and the North Reservoir Russian army captured northwest. So if we come up, this of course is the reservoir he is speaking about. We zoom out, and just up near then Zoroya, more areas being captured by the Russian forces. Again, if we zoom out, this is a major envelopment that is happening as we speak. Let's just move to the west of here a little bit, and we have Velika Novosilka. Now, many are saying that there is fighting right on the outskirts in here at the moment. Let's have a look at what Syriac is saying. And look, to be fair, movement, I know it's not in the same axis or direction, but when we see it this close, we can assume there was definitely some movement there. And I understand exactly what Russia is trying to push for here is this road. Through Novaya Kamar, Rozdolny, they have successfully cut off both of these roads. This road is the remaining one. If it is still available to use, there would be fire control on this road, but we don't know how many shells could actually be allocated to it. Of course, you can cross areas, but it's not as easy, especially in poor conditions. So that is what I believe Syriac is trying to show to cut that off. And we could see a major withdrawal out of Velika Novosilka or a major tactical or strategic encirclement at 1.2. Let's continue moving west and we get down to the ghost of Robotny. And then we push down in here and we'll see then where Kopani is. This is Kopani right in here. More movements out to the north. Now, Syriac has been showing many movements in here for some time, but it's not getting shown across these maps. See this dogleg in the road is, it's saying it is in line with this, so sort of where that grey zone is. Syriac has been showing a lot of movements around Kopani, but we haven't seen that for some time. Now, we'll come back up, of course, where we see the most red check on this map, of course, being on the Pokrovsk front. Now, this is in the axis of which I'm not surprised at all. I've said multiple times, I believe that before Russia push on Pokrovsk, they need to reach Udashny, at least under strategic fire control. So, well, this guy's got some problems going on here, but they need to reach this area to cut off the train line through here and limit logistics and get that then western flank. That is what I believe on that front. Let's have a look at Syriac and see where he is telling the same yet a different story. Again, I'm convinced that some people are seeing two different versions of this war. Novi Trud, out here we see further occupation of grounds to the south around Pishani Mark II. That lines up on these maps, as well as towards Uspenivkia as well, and out to the south near this Novopolenivkia too. So look, these maps are fairly similar. Russia is taking advancements in this area. There is a risk of fortified positions and getting in behind those. Now, let's talk about this airline. Of course, 67 people, 67 souls aboard, 38 killed and 29 survivors. There's a few very important things to talk about in this and how people may be seeing it. First, let's go over what has occurred. I'll show you some images too. From a Ukrainian page, it said, just as the plane was approaching Grozny, an air raid alert was issued in the region due to a kamikaze drone attack. The Russian air defense was actively engaged. Now, what we have is Ukrainian drones in the air, so I do believe likely Russian air defense was active. Could have it had been this? Maybe. Again, we're not air crash investigations. Hopefully we will get a full rundown of this that isn't just spun one way to suit a narrative by powers to be. We will see. But as we've learnt this week from the USS Gettysburg, air defense and friend and foe systems is not always super reliable. And this is a civilian plane with civilians aboard. So air defense absolutely can do this. What do I think at this point in time? I think it is highly likely that it was air defense hitting this due to those Ukrainian drones being in the air. And this is a hard one of people going back and forth. Who is at fault here? And let's view this the other way. When Ukrainian air defense hits an area, when Russia has fired in missiles or drones, everyone blames Russia because, of course, that would never have happened if you'd never fired that drone or missile into our airspace. Our interceptor would never have been in the air. But then you can butterfly effect this backwards and backwards and backwards and go, well, if Peter the Great didn't do this at X time, then this would have never occurred. So how far back do you want to go? At this point in time, this is why I've been saying that this is why Lviv Airport should not and cannot open, because this could absolutely happen. Even if people are looking for that to open, with how small Europe is and to cross into Poland and go there, that's why I believe it shouldn't open. And this is why I actually believe as well that Tel Aviv Airport being open was a fucking massive risk as well. So at that point in time, that's where sort of I sit on it. Let's have a look. Sorry, not this one first. So we see this is some footage of the Embraer. People saying these are likely air defense fragments going through, but also it could have been something sucked in the engine exploding, the incredibly high RPM on a turbine engine, and pieces of that going through. And people are pointing out the different sizes of shrapnel going here, and the penetrating capacity of some of those doesn't really indicate air defense. Again, hard to get an idea on that. Again, I'm not sitting up the bloody jump seat in a plane. From Russia's aviation watchdog on Telegram, preliminary after the collision with birds due to an emergency situation was on board. Its commander decided to go to an alternative airfield. Aktu was chosen. So, of course, what we presume was this plane was flying towards Grozny. Then air defense was active, and they had then landed or crashed in Kazakhstan. Again, it is hard to know exactly what has occurred here. People analysing these images were the same people that were hydroelectric engineers when dams go down. I'm just giving my 2 cents, but we will wait and see. There are people looking at that a lot of the shrapnel is on the top side or vertical pieces, not on the bottom, and some people calling it out that it's not this. The fighter bomber said, "We've sorted out the bird's appearance in the video. It was a matter of time. For some time, they will be engaged in senseless jerking off UAV, SAM, or bomb in the luggage compartment, but I think it's not for long. It was a shitty year." So, again, we don't really know. I will say in air defense hitting a civilian airliner, what we're looking at and what it looks like can be different to maybe something else. Some are saying this could be caused from it hitting the ground as well, and the front portion of the fuselage exploding and penetrating there. Some are pointing at there's penetration into elements, but not through and through. One of the biggest things I have, what gets me is someone has said, look, if an air defense hit this, the amount of tungsten shrapnel going through the fuselage itself, there's people, of course, injured and killed in the fuselage from that, but not as much as it would be from a specific missile system. Could it be a man-pad, S-300, S-400? Could it be whatever? Again, could it be a bomb? Could it be anything? At this point in time, it's all up in arms. And I always say, just be careful of looking out for things to making your mind up early. Just assess everything, because I've even said that even false flag events absolutely could occur in this war and have occurred, of course, in this war. We could see more of it. But if people apply logic one way and don't apply it the other way, the dynamic between idealists and realists, that scares me in the Western world, because some people are for some and not for others. A perfect example of this is Ben Shapiro. I'd love to talk to him on some things where I'm like, you add absolute ideas of evidence, fact finding, all of this on this, but then on your other belief over here is just completely on nothing. Like, do you apply it everywhere or nowhere? Anyway, this is a big thing if it is exactly what they're saying it is. Finland-Estonia power cable goes dark, prompting sabotage concerns. On Christmas Day, the Estlink 2 subsea power cable between Finland and Estonia went dark, prompting the speculation of a hybrid sabotage attack on subsea infrastructure in the Baltic. And people say that we aren't at war. We are in the second Cold War, or just a very quiet third World War. That is how I see the world at the moment, with Russia and China and powers that be there, sitting in economic alliances, and NATO. And this is being fought in proxy areas, with Syria being one of them, Ukraine being another one of them, and we will see other ones open up. The Finnish utility, Fingrid, detected an outage on this line, the DC power cable connecting Finland and Estonia. It is not known if the disconnection occurred below the water or on land, so where the fuck is it? The cable has malfunctioned on its own in the past. In January, internal short circuit took it offline for months. Nothing is ruled out. Sabotage is also considered an option. So if we were to apply like Occam's razor theory here, it might just be a fucking fuse is blown, but we'll see. But they do say twice in the past year, Chinese flag vessels have almost certainly severed subsea cables on the Baltic Sea floor by dredging their anchors for long distances, just drag an anchor. Quite a source of inquiries have suggested the vessels may have acted at the direction of Russian intelligence. Again, I don't know the relationship between Russia and China and how strong that actually is, because China is far more powerful than Russia is, both economically, militarily around the world. I can't see why they would be doing it on Russia's behalf. If it was the other way, I'd understand that completely. In the current geopolitical environment, attention has quickly turned to possible suspects for the latest outage. Future investigative targets could include the Chinese tanker ship, the Xinjiang 2, and the Cook Islands flag tanker Eagle S, both of which were nearby at the time of the break. And let's continue here. The Xinjiang 2 was in the area, but her tracker appears to show no signs of slowing or maneuvering. The Eagle S last port was in Russia. The data shows that she slowed down over the chartered cable for a time period in question. Sus. The tanker later performed a U-turn, took all way off and stopped in Finnish waters. She was joined by the Finnish Coast Guard patrol vessel Turva. Do you know why Finnish Navy ships have do you know why Finnish Navy ships have a barcode on the side of them? So when they return to port, they can Scandinavian. It's one of my favourite jokes. I'm sorry I stuffed it up. But the Eagle S is an 18-year-old tanker, recently changed ownerships, name and flag registry, and she is now tied to operating interests in India and the UAE. Combined with her recent call at Russian oil port and recent inspection record, these factors may be associated with Russian-linked dark fleet operations. Again, wait and see on this, but there is hybrid warfare going everywhere, and I believe that this is just the start to potentially decades of quiet Cold War, or potentially sinking into a hot war, which I don't think anyone wants a hot war, but I think we'll see this popping up everywhere between powers that be and targeting electrical grids, ships, everything. When you have countries that see this as existential, what is the limit at that point? And of course, China see that this century is their century to dominate as well. And I don't think China wants a multipolar world like Russia does. Russia wants a they're fucking very vocal about this. They want multipolar world with different, areas or civilizations sitting, equal. I don't think China want that. I think China may see that as a stepping stone for China to become the global power and sit at the top of a unipolar world, which if you look at industrial sectors alone can be concerning. Anyway, legends, you have a fantastic day and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.